I can still remember the way the candlelight flickered across the grand hall of the castle that night. It felt as though the entire world had been wrapped in a dream, the kind you don't want to wake up from. My bride, no, my love, was radiant, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders like threads of fire, and her emerald green eyes sparkling with a happiness that mirrored my own. The castle, with its towering stone walls and ancient tapestries, had an eerie beauty about it. Guests danced and laughed, their shadows playing along the uneven surfaces of the walls. The air smelled of aged wine and the faint, sweet scent of the flowers that adorned every table. Even then, there was something about the place that felt off. The air seemed heavier the farther you ventured from the crowd. It was her idea to play a game. She always loved a bit of mischief, and hide-and-seek seemed like the perfect way to break from the formalities of the evening. A wedding should be fun, not just tradition, she'd said with a laugh, her voice as light and musical as the harp that played in the corner. I remember her grabbing my hand, pulling me into the circle of guests, and announcing her plan. Laughter echoed through the hall, and soon the game was underway. She leaned in close to me, her warm breath brushing my cheek, and whispered, "Don't follow me. I'll find the best hiding place. You'll see." She disappeared into the shadows of the castle's many hallways, her white dress trailing behind her like a ghostly wisp. I stayed behind, giving her the head start she demanded, my heart light and full of love. But even in the joy of the moment, I felt a strange twinge. Perhaps it was the castle itself, the way its ancient stones seemed to whisper secrets only they could hear. Or perhaps it was the way her laughter faded so quickly, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the hallways she ventured into. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to wedding nerves, and joined the others in counting down before we began the search. Little did I know, that would be the last time I saw her smile. The countdown ended, and the guests dispersed into the castle's labyrinth of hallways and chambers, laughter echoing as the game began. I decided to take my time, savoring the thought of finding her hidden away, her giggles giving her position away. The castle was a maze of grand corridors and forgotten rooms, some decorated with faded portraits of long-dead ancestors, whose gazes seemed to follow me as I passed. The deeper I ventured, the quieter it became, the lively sounds of the party reduced to a distant murmur. At first, the game was amusing. I peeked into rooms, pulling back curtains and checking behind doors. Guests called out playfully as they searched, but one by one, they returned to the main hall empty-handed, laughing at their lack of success. "She's good at this," someone joked. "Best bride we've ever had at hide-and-seek." But as the minutes turned into an hour, the laughter began to fade. I noticed it first in the faces of my guests, the subtle shift from amusement to confusion, then concern. Whispers replaced jokes, and soon, the remaining players joined forces to search for her together. "Did anyone see her go upstairs?" one guest asked, a note of worry creeping into their voice. Another mentioned the East Wing, a part of the castle that had been closed off for years. Someone else swore they'd heard her footsteps echoing down the servants' corridor. I led the search, calling out her name into the dark hallways. "You can come out now. The game's over." But there was no response, only the hollow sound of my voice bouncing back at me. My heart began to race, panic gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Surely, this was still part of the game. Maybe she was hiding, waiting for me to find her. That was her way, always pushing the moment, drawing things out for fun. But as the hours dragged on, my confidence wavered. I found myself standing in the middle of a forgotten room, dust motes swirling in the light of my lantern. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something acrid and wrong. My hands trembled as I gripped the handle of the door, pushing it open to reveal another empty chamber. The guests' voices grew more frantic as we scoured every corner of the castle. Even the old storage rooms, where cobwebs hung like curtains and the cold stone floor numbed our feet, were searched. Still, she was nowhere to be found. The final blow came when one of the staff approached me, their face pale as they whispered, "We've checked everywhere. She's not here." A terrible weight settled in my chest. I refused to believe it. She had to be somewhere, waiting for me to find her. But I couldn't ignore the truth staring me in the face. She was gone. The celebration turned into a somber vigil, guests gathering in the grand hall with worried faces, their once joyful expressions replaced by fear. I couldn't stop pacing, the sound of my footsteps filling the silence as I replayed every moment in my mind, desperate to recall some detail I had missed. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than anything I could imagine. The days that followed were a blur of frantic searches and endless questioning. My guests had long since departed, their departure marked by awkward goodbyes and whispered reassurances. The castle, once alive with laughter and celebration, had become a cold and oppressive prison. I could barely eat or sleep, consumed by a gnawing dread. The staff searched tirelessly alongside me, their torches casting flickering shadows on the ancient walls. Every sound, creaking wood, distant wind, felt like her calling out to me. We tore through every room, overturned every piece of furniture, searched every hidden nook. The vastness of the castle, once awe-inspiring, now felt sinister, its endless hallways mocking me with their silence. Even the staff, who had worked here for decades, confessed they were unfamiliar with certain parts of the estate. It was during one of these exhaustive searches that I stumbled into the East Wing, a section of the castle that had been closed off for years. The air was different here, colder and damp, as if time itself had forgotten these rooms. The faded wallpaper peeled away in long strips, and the floor creaked ominously beneath my weight. As I wandered deeper, my lantern cast eerie shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. I found myself in a long hallway lined with locked doors. One by one, I opened them, each revealing nothing but decay, moldy furniture, tattered curtains, forgotten relics of another time. At the end of the hallway stood a heavy oak door. It looked older than the others, its surface scarred with deep scratches. Something about it unsettled me, but I couldn't turn away. My hands trembled as I reached for the iron handle, its icy touch sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the room was unremarkable save for one thing: a massive wooden chest sitting in the center. Its craftsmanship was exquisite, the dark wood polished to a dull sheen. Carvings of vines and mistletoe adorned its surface, their details so intricate they seemed almost alive. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Something about the air in the room felt wrong, thick and suffocating. The chest seemed to emanate a quiet malice, as though it had been waiting for me. Could it be? I whispered aloud, the words barely audible over the roaring in my ears. With a deep breath, I knelt beside the chest and ran my fingers over its surface. The carvings were smooth but cold, almost unnaturally so. My pulse quickened as I noticed something strange, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of decay emanating from the cracks in the wood. Summoning every ounce of courage, I gripped the lid and lifted. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing like a mournful cry in the empty room. What lay inside froze the breath in my lungs. It was empty, but the relief was short-lived. As I leaned closer, the chest's depth seemed unnatural. It felt like staring into a void, a darkness that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. Then, faintly, I heard it a whisper. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was more like a feeling, an impression, as if the chest itself was speaking directly to my mind. It spoke of despair, of time lost, of her. I stumbled back, the lantern slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows twisting and writhing as if alive. I fled, slamming the door behind me, my heart racing. For the first time, I felt the weight of something far darker than I had imagined. The chest was no ordinary relic. It was a witness, perhaps even a participant, in something unspeakable. I wasn't just searching for her anymore. I was confronting something that defied reason, something ancient and cruel. After the encounter with the chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just an object. It was a sentinel, a gatekeeper to something I couldn't comprehend. I tried to convince myself it was my grief playing tricks on me, but the whispers lingered in my ears long after I'd left the room. The following days were consumed by an unrelenting obsession. I pored over every document, every family record, and every blueprint of the castle I could find. Old journals, correspondence, even the castle's original plans. Everything hinted at secrets buried in its walls, but nothing pointed directly to her. Each night, I found myself drawn back to the east wing. I'd stand outside the oak door, my hand hovering over the handle, unable to step inside. The chest loomed in my mind, its presence as real as the stone beneath my feet. It was during one of these vigils that I noticed something peculiar. The light from my lantern flickered unnaturally, its flames swaying toward the chest as though pulled by an unseen force. I stepped closer, and there it was again, whispers, faint and distant, like a melody carried on the wind. This time, I forced myself to open the chest once more. The void inside seemed deeper, darker than before. My reflection in the polished wood distorted, twisting into something unrecognizable. And then I saw it, a strand of her hair. It was unmistakable, the soft auburn locks I had so often run my fingers through. It lay coiled at the bottom like a mocking token. My chest tightened as I reached for it, but the moment my fingers touched the strands, the room erupted with noise. A deafening crash resounded through the castle, followed by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and echoing from the floors above. I froze, my hand still clutching the hair. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. The footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, until it felt as if the very walls were pulsating with each step. I grabbed the lantern and bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. Back in the main hall, I found the staff gathered, their faces pale and strained. They had heard the noise too, and their frightened whispers filled the room. One of them, an elderly groundskeeper named Harlan, spoke of an old legend tied to the castle, a tale of a cursed relic that demanded a sacrifice. "Do you know what's in the east wing?" I asked, desperation seeping into my voice. Harlan hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor. "The chest," he muttered. "It's been here longer than the castle itself. No one's dared to disturb it in years." His words sent a chill down my spine. Could it be true? Had I awakened something that should have been left alone? And more importantly, what had it done with her? That night, I dreamed of her. She was standing at the edge of the woods near the castle, her figure illuminated by a pale, unnatural light. She looked at me, her face both familiar and strange, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice carrying an echo that seemed to reverberate in my very bones. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The dream wasn't just a dream. It was a message, a cry for help. Whatever had taken her wasn't done yet, and neither was I. I knew now that the answers lay not in the castle's walls, but in the chest itself. Whatever it was, an artifact, a curse, or something else entirely, it held the key to her fate, and if I was to save her, I would have to confront it once more. I woke with the resolve of a man with nothing left to lose. The dream of her by the woods, the sorrow in her eyes, It all pointed to one undeniable truth. She was still here, trapped somewhere beyond my reach, and the chest held the answer. The castle seemed alive as I made my way back to the east wing. Shadows flickered unnaturally against the walls, their forms stretching and curling like grasping fingers. Every creak of the floorboards and gust of wind felt like a warning, urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. When I reached the room, the air felt heavier, charged with a presence that made my skin crawl. The chest sat in the center, as if waiting for me. I placed the lantern on the ground and knelt before it, the polished oak glinting in the dim light. "I'm here," I said aloud, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. "If you can hear me, show me what I need to see." My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. The darkness within seemed to ripple, alive and malevolent. But this time, there was something new, a faint glow emanating from the bottom. I reached inside, the cold biting at my fingers like frost. When I pulled my hand back, I held a locket. It was hers. The delicate gold pendant gleamed faintly, its chain wrapped tightly around my fingers. I opened it and saw her picture inside, a photograph I'd never seen before. She was smiling, but her eyes carried the same sorrow I'd seen in my dream. The room began to tremble, a low rumble building beneath my feet. The whispers that had haunted me grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices, each one distinct yet incomprehensible. And then I saw it, a shadow rising from the chest, a shape that twisted and writhed like smoke. It was humanoid, towering and featureless except for its eyes. Two pinpricks of light that burned with an unnatural intensity. The temperature in the room plummeted as it loomed over me, the locket in my hand glowing brighter. "You took her," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Why?" The figure didn't respond, but the whispers coalesced into a single word that echoed in my mind: bound. The shadow lunged toward me, its form enveloping the room. I felt an icy grip on my chest, as if it were trying to pull me into the void. But the locket burned hot in my hand, and the light from it grew blinding. The shadow recoiled, its form unraveling like threads in the wind. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Clutching the locket, I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The castle seemed to groan in protest, but the whispers faded as I fled. Back in my study, I examined the locket under the dim glow of a candle. Inside, I found an inscription etched into the gold, forever entwined. It was a message, a clue to the connection between her and the chest. But the discovery brought no comfort. If anything, it solidified my worst fear, that whatever had taken her wasn't bound by the physical world, and neither was she. In the days that followed, I searched tirelessly for answers. The locket seemed to be both a beacon and a barrier, its light growing faint whenever I neared the east wing. I knew then that it was connected to her, and to the chest, in ways I couldn't fully understand. One night, as I sat staring at the locket, I felt her presence again. The air grew cold, and the faint scent of mistletoe filled the room. Her voice was barely a whisper, carried on the edge of the wind. "Don't stop," she said. "I'm still here." Her words were both a plea and a warning. The chest wasn't just an artifact, it was a prison, a gateway to something far darker than I could have imagined. And I wasn't done with it yet. I resolved to return to the east wing one final time, to confront whatever lay within the chest, and, if it came to it, to face the darkness on its own terms. For her, for us.